Each of the individual frameworks has a variety of uses, and each adds value to the ongoing transformation of a service-oriented business in its own right. Used in combination, though, the individual frameworks can increase their usefulness. A good deal of work's been done to explicitly map frameworks' artifacts so that the linkages between them form part of the overall frameworks model. In this short video, though, we'll simply look at this in terms of the types of mapping that make sense and how those mappings can help to plan and execute a transformation project. First, let's look at the business process framework and the information framework. A matrix can be drawn up that identifies business process framework processes at level 2 that are coupled with information framework ABEs, aggregate business entities. Processes that require read-only access to data from an ABE are considered secondary. An ABE may have any number of secondary level 2 processes mapped to it. The mapping is strongest when an ABE's lifecycle is managed by only one level 2 process. This process manages creating it, reading it, updating it, and deleting it without interference from any other process. This level 2 process is then considered a primary process. If a one-to-one mapping isn't possible, an ABE may be mapped to 2 or 3 level 2 processes to cover the whole of its life cycle. These level 2 processes are then all considered as primary. Mapping ABEs to multiple level 2 primary processes results from either duality or ambiguity. We say that the mapping is ambiguous when an ABE maps to 2 or more processes in a single process area, say both are in EM. This might indicate that the ABE should be refactored into ABEs that each support one process, or there may be missing ABEs that should be part of the mapping, or maybe a missing process that should aggregate the processes at level 2. Or of course there may simply have been a mistake in the mapping. Duality occurs when an ABE maps to 2 processes in different process areas, say operations and SIP, operations and EM, or SIP and EM as I've shown here. The ABE has no clear alignment with core functionality in either area. So, the act of creating the mapping can have an impact on the structure of the frameworks, causing the information framework and business process framework teams to question and test their logic and propose changes to the frameworks to better accommodate the logical mapping. So, that is the first use case for the mappings. TM Forums teams can use the mappings to ensure the completeness and correctness of their frameworks, breaking down the level 2 processes to ensure that there are task-level processes to support the life cycle of an ABE, reconciling the existence of an ABE for each level 2 process, etc. Release on release, this keeps the frameworks in step. With the mappings in place, TM Forum members can make better use of the business process framework and the information framework together to define the scope of a project. The boundaries of change can be set consistently for the process model and data model of the project scope. The definition could be made using each framework independently, or using the mappings to cross-check the scope and identify omissions or out-of-scope items on either side. Alternatively, the scope can be defined in one framework and then inferred from the mappings in the other. As the project progresses, scope creep can be detected when new entities or processes are pulled from outside to inside the project. And where there's a need for change management and impact analysis, the process and data implications can be cross-checked easily, mitigating possible errors in the analysis. There has also been some work on connecting Business Process Framework Level 3 and 4 processes with Information Framework entities. This finer-grained mapping is incomplete, but very useful as a start point for low-level use case development because the task-oriented processes more closely reflect typical business services interfaces and the actions that services take on entities. The Level 4 processes also represent a closer mapping of project scope, and so can be used for managing scope, impact analysis and so on at a more detailed level. Another possible mapping extends the business process framework and information framework mapping to include the application framework. Since the application framework describes the scope of distinct units of implementable business software, the functional map of the application framework has a strong alignment with the business process framework and so also the information framework. In this example, we can see that bill calculation, an application framework application area, is mapped to bill invoice management at level 2 in the business process framework, and this in turn has a number of primary and secondary relationships with information framework ABEs. The integration framework's business services and business service categories can map to application framework application areas. The diagram shows an example of some mappings built around resource. Resource is the business service classification. Resource provisioning, inventory resource, manage resource inventory and order management are business services within the resource classification, and resource order management, resource lifecycle management and resource inventory management are the application framework application areas supported by the classification and the business services within the classification, so we see that the integration framework and application framework can be linked because the functions of some business services are equivalent to functions contained within the mapped applications. Beyond this mapping, we can link through the application framework to the related business process framework and information framework artifacts. In this example, we see, right to left, the ABE service in the information framework linked to primary and secondary level 2 processes from the business process framework, and the primary process linked onward to an application framework application area, and then the integration framework equivalent set of business services. Many such mappings are possible. The wider mapping adds further value to the project scope definitions because they expose the interfaces and business services that can be designed into the solution and used to manage interactions within the project scope and at the periphery to integrate with other applications. The mappings we've seen explain how the usefulness of any individual framework can be extended by using its mapping to other frameworks. If you're planning or executing a change project, you should consider whether these links will help you describe and manage the work. The detailed mappings are available for TM Forum members to download as a guidebook, GB 942-MAP.